By the fall of 1962, Boston breathed a collective sigh of relief. The nightmare, it seemed, was finally over. The string of summer killings that had terrorized the city, particularly its elderly women, had stopped. Weeks turned into months with no new victims, no more terrifying headlines. The intense fear that had gripped entire neighborhoods began to fade. People started to reclaim their lives, their routines, believing that the horror that haunted their city had finally burned itself out. But they were tragically mistaken. Behind the scenes, investigations were still active, but they were fractured. There was no single, unified command structure. Small police teams worked independently, cooperating but not truly combining their efforts. More importantly, a growing number of detectives were no longer convinced they were even hunting a single killer. The idea of one phantom figure was losing ground. Even when a woman named Modesta Freeman was tragically killed in mid-October, authorities didn't officially connect it to the summer murders. It was treated as an isolated, separate crime. To the public, this only reinforced the belief that the danger had passed. The press, however, had already coined a name for the killer, the Phantom. Sometimes, he was called the Strangler, but most detectives rejected both labels. To them, the Phantom was more of a myth than a real man. In late November of 1962, Boston Police Commissioner Edmund McNamara stood before the City Council. What he said next sent a shockwave through the room. McNamara declared that only 3, maybe 4 murders at most, could realistically be connected to this so-called Phantom. He then dropped a bombshell. These crimes, he insisted, were not even Boston's most serious criminal problem. He went further, stating that Boston, despite its relatively small population, ranked among the top 3 most crime-ridden cities in the entire United States, alongside giants like New York and Chicago. The South End, specifically the 4th Police District, had topped the national list for violent crime 3 separate times in 1962 alone. City officials were furious. They accused McNamara of exaggeration, of fear-mongering. His relationship with the city's leadership was already crumbling, but it was about to shatter completely. But as events would soon prove, McNamara had underestimated only one thing: the killer himself. Early December brought typical New England weather. A cold, biting wind blew off the Atlantic. Temperatures hovered just above freezing, and a miserable rain turned to sleet, then back to rain again. And on December 5th, in the midst of this bleak weather, Boston learned the terrible truth. The Phantom was real. That afternoon, 20-year-old Gloria Todd was hurrying home through the cold, steady rain. She was a student at the Carnegie Institute of Medical Technology and lived in apartment 4C at 315 Huntington Avenue. She shared the apartment with 2 of her classmates, Audrey Adams and Sophie Clark. The 3 young women had chosen the apartment for a simple reason. It was affordable, spacious, and far more comfortable than cramped student housing. They were diligent students, but they also enjoyed their evenings together. They would cook, talk, drink hot grog, and unwind after long, demanding days at the Institute. That Wednesday promised to be just another ordinary evening. Around 5:30 p.m., Gloria let herself into the dark apartment. She went to her room, changed out of her wet clothes, and laid out her textbooks, planning to get some studying done. But she felt hungry and decided to grab a bite to eat first. She walked from her bedroom, opened the door to the living room, and flipped on the light. And in that instant, she knew something was terribly wrong. There, on the floor, was her roommate, Sophie Clark. Gloria would later tell police that she didn't check for a pulse. She didn't call Sophie's name. She just knew. She knew that Sophie was dead. The scene that greeted investigators was one that defied simple explanation. Sophie was lying on her back. Her clothing was disarranged, with items torn and scattered across the floor. Nothing about the scene suggested an accident or some random act. But one detail stood out above all others, a detail that sent a chill through the seasoned detectives when they arrived. Sophie's ivory-colored skirt, the one she had been wearing earlier that day, was wrapped tightly around her neck, almost like a scarf. That single, horrifying detail echoed something Boston had seen before, something the entire city had desperately wanted to forget. The murder of Sophie Clark changed everything. It made it terrifyingly clear that the killings hadn't ended at all. They had only paused. The newspapers immediately resurrected the name Phantom Strangler. Headlines screamed of a killer who had returned the moment the city let down its guard. Fear, cold and potent, seeped back into Boston streets, into its apartment buildings and stairwells. And for the first time, the name that would forever define this case and its legacy of terror entered the public consciousness. the Boston Strangler. The city believed the nightmare was over. But evil does not always disappear. Sometimes it waits. Some mysteries stay hidden. Others keep returning until someone finally listens. If you want more stories the world can't explain, more cases that were buried, more truths they don't want released, subscribe to Shadow Files. Like the video and tell me in the comments which mystery should be opened next. Your file is waiting.